So, in what way is the Agenda 21 being implemented in Australia? That's an indication of how it's been implemented all around the world. How do these rules and laws and agreements and treaties that are made by the UN actually affecting all the countries who signed up to the UN? The Paris Treaty Agreement in 2015, which is known as Agenda 2030, or the Rio Earth Summit Agreement from 1992, that's called Agenda 21. So with the Australian fires, there are circumstances that have made this year's fire be worse than all the other years, in terms of how ferocious the fires are being. So one of those ways is in the privatisation of natural resources, where the governments get to take ownership over a natural resource and then sell it to a private corporation. And examples of how that's been going on in Australia is the selling of water to private corporations and the creation of private dams and the altering of the flow of rivers to divert the water from where it naturally used to flow in its ecosystem to flow more in tandem to serve what they call the ecosystem of the economy. So there's private dams, there's mining. For mining, loads of water is used, and for fracking in particular, because fracking, they add chemicals to water and force that water down deep underneath the earth. It uses millions of litres of water. And then there's cotton farming, which is one of the most intensive types of farming for water. It uses up tons of water. So there are all ways in which things government have been doing with private corporations in alignment with Agenda 2030 allow them to be able to sell off the water and divert the water so that the water is no longer flowing naturally. Another one of the things that's going on is something called Clara, which is a high-speed rail network, which is from Sydney down to Melbourne, I think, up to Melbourne. So it is a high-speed railway that would serve 8 smart cities that are to be built. And it serves between those to be a high-speed railway. So the areas in which the fires have burned happen to be all along that rail line planned route, which means that all the property around that area is now pretty much worthless, which can be bought up by the vultures and which can then be used for the high-speed rail. And then they build their smart cities network on it, and suddenly that land that was worth almost nothing in 5 years' time is going to be worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. So another way that Agenda 21 is involved is in stopping the wisdom tradition of the native indigenous aboriginal people who knew how to do burn backs in a controlled fashion that didn't harm the nature, didn't harm the animals, it gave the animals a chance to escape from the fires. But it meant that the fires are done not in the hot season, not in the drought season, and that means that there's big tracts of land in which the fire can't spread from bush to bush. But Agenda 21 and the Green Agenda stopped that burn back from happening, so that the dead wood that falls from trees is all lying on the ground and drying out year after year, and then a year like this year comes up and it gives loads of dry tinder fuel for the fires to just burn and burn and burn. So successive governments have been involved in the destruction of Australia. True laws and trade agreements that they've put into place and implemented over decades, which are globalization policies. So the other thing is cutting back of the funding for the fireys, the actual fire brigades that work to put out these fires. Their funding has been getting cut over the last years. And another thing is that the bushfires, on an esoteric sense, the bushfires have burned away the nest from which the phoenix will rise with a Smart City Agenda 2030 achieved by 2030. The urbanization of humanity. So that's getting humans out of nature into cities, urbanised, educated, taking away the petrol cars, diesel cars, so that people don't have the right to travel anymore. And then the other thing that Max Egan was pointing out so clearly is that in the geoengineering in the clouds and the steering of atmospheric rivers, zapping the atmosphere with radars and ionospheric heaters, and spraying out of the back of the planes particular ingredients of aluminium and strontium and barium, spreading that nanodust particles out of the planes, which then settles down to the ground and settles down to the forest floor and settles down on the roofs of all the homesteads. And those three ingredients of aluminium, strontium and barium are particularly the ingredients that are used to create sparkler dust for sparklers, the things that you light and then they fizz and burn and burn and burn and burn really brightly. And you've got to be very careful with them that you don't set your home on fire. So the same ingredients that produce such a volatile chemical mix is the ingredients that's been sprayed all over the world, which is settling down to the earth. And the aluminium is stopping plants from growing properly. And yet Monsanto, who are now Bayer, have patents for seeds that can grow in aluminium-rich soils. So there's a tie-up here of a vast plan that's utterly frightening and very hard to believe, which appears to be going on. And we're left with the question of, well, what do we do about that then? How do we manage to unite as people where we all live spread out all over the world? How do we unite as a people to expose that this is going on? Because not believing it's going on is the biggest means which allows it to go on. The biggest lie the devil ever told is that he doesn't exist. And I don't necessarily really know the answer to that, how we do that, apart from to meet up with people of like mind and heart in the real world, as well as on the internet, and at least be able to discuss these things and inside in ourselves be able to process these things so that we can get over our cognitive dissonance and get over the thing of just staring at stuff on the internet going, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. Or how to bridge that gap to actually talk to our families and friends and not be spreading a freaked out fear, but to have processed it enough in ourselves to understand that this is a big long old story and a spiritual story which has come down to earth and is now something which we need to deal with on the earth level in our own physical lives somehow through communication and somehow through being able to infiltrate the system, a system that's been running by people who support the system. In some way we need to be able to be recognizable as existing in the real world and able to affect the system through its democracy, I guess, is one of the few things that we have, and through publishing, I guess, is one of the few things that we have, and through speaking to our real people we know in a real world who may have enough respect for us as individuals to actually have a look into stuff that they never watched on the internet before. Excuse me that I find it a little bit difficult doing these recordings. It's a lot of information to try and put into some sort of coherent sense when the information itself isn't all that coherent. But anyway, I'll practice by doing. Thanks.